In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the Fluting Toolpath to make a fun little game just like this. Let's talk for a second about the traditional way that you would use a fluting toolpath. Well, if you look up the Wikipedia article on this, it's going to say that flutes are just grooves that run along the surface of something. You'll see this in all kinds of different columns and so on, and it looks really quite nice as a detail. Now, earlier this year, we released a free project that showed you how to create a candlestick, and in a test file for that, I showed you how to add flutes to an actual rotary toolpath in the same fashion that you would if you were going to create like a Roman pillar or something like that. Now, that's not the only way you can use fluting toolpaths. A few years ago, Michael Tyler released a really fun little project where he used the fluting toolpath to add some details to the side of a child's pull toy, and that turned out really nice. What it ended up doing is it gave you kind of that sort of paint effect where the line got thin at one end, thicker in the other, and then thinner at the other end, and it looked really nice. Now, one of my favorite projects that I created using the fluting toolpath was a stool that I made that we actually use in the marketing department. It's like the best used seat ever, and everybody likes to sit in it. And it was a nice sort of alternative to 3D modeling, excuse me. In that, I showed you how to use that nice shape to create sort of the seat print on the top of the seat, but also I showed you how to use that same fluting toolpath to create a little dish. Now, so to get started, what we're going to do is we're going to jump right into VCarve Desktop, and I'll show you all the different options that we have in the fluting toolpath. Okay, as you can see here, I've got VCarve Desktop open, and we're looking at the 2D view, and there's just a single line down the center of my job. If I go over to my 3D view, you'll see exactly the same thing. And we're going to use this one line to demonstrate pretty much every feature that we have in the fluting toolpath. So over here in our toolpaths tab, you'll see that we have the fluting toolpath right here. I'm just going to select that. And we'll start at the very start of the form, and I'll just kind of briefly go over the sections, and then we'll go in a little bit deeper in each one of those. If I don't happen to cover something in the fluting toolpath that you're interested in, then we have a great video called How to Use the Fluting Toolpath that's available for you to watch whenever you would like to. So at the very start of this fluting toolpath dialog, we've got a start depth, which you can set to what you want. So these are all your cutting depths, if you like to, your start depth and your flute depth. You can choose your bit. Now, in the fluting toolpath, you can use almost any kind of bit that you'd like to, so it'd be fun to explore some of those different tool geometries. We've got our flute type, we've got our ramp type, and you can choose your vectors in the order that you'd like them to be cut in, also, like you can a lot of other toolpaths, which is kind of nice. It might give you a nice sort of flow to your job. And you can also project it onto your 3D model, which I think that's kind of cool. We're not going to explore that in this presentation, but definitely it's something that you're going to want to play around with if you're interested in the fluting toolpath. And you can also use your vector selector to help automate some of those toolpaths. Now, we're not going to touch on that, but there is another great video on how to use the vector selector that's available for you to watch whenever you'd like to. So again, let's go back to the very top of this form again. So we have our start depth. I think it's pretty much self-explanatory. That's where we're going to want to start off your toolpath. Your flute depth is how deep you want the lowest point of your flute to be. Now keep in mind, this is going to take into account your pass depth. So if you have a pass depth, like for instance, that's less than a ½ an inch, like I have set here, then it's going to make 2 passes at your flute. So that's just something that I think you should keep in mind. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I've got a proper tool for this. So in my case, the ball nose is perfect. It's going to be a nice sort of round flute. And then the flute type. So let's start at the very top. We've got ramp over the complete length of our vector. We have ramp only at the start, and we've got ramp at start and end. And then we also have our ramp type, which is linear and smooth. So first of all, let's explore ramp over the complete length. So with this vector selected, we're going to go ahead and use those settings that I have. We're going to use a linear ramp type, and we'll just calculate that. And we'll have a look at the edge of our model so we can see what's happening in our toolpath wireframe. You'll see how it's starting out at the top of our material and it's sloping down into our material. in a straight linear line. Now if we go ahead back into that toolpath again and choose smooth instead and recalculate that, you'll see there's a subtle difference where instead of it going straight down, it's actually scooping a bit to that half an inch where I want it to stop. That looks kind of neat. I think that's kind of nice. Let's close this down and let's have a look at that toolpath again. And this time we're going to use ramp at start. And as soon as we click that box, you'll see that now we have access to these two options here, which is ramp length and ramp percent. So pretty much we're going to tell how far we would like our ramp to happen before it bottoms out at that 0.5. So if we choose ramp length and we go with maybe a half an inch, 0.5, and we go to a linear type just so we can see it a bit better, we'll calculate that. And you'll see that now from the side, there it is. It's diving in for a half an inch down to that 0.5 inch, and then it's going straight across. So if we close that down and we go back into that toolpath again, we can have a look at ramp at start and end. We'll just select that and we'll recalculate that again. And you'll see what we have now is that ramp at both the front end and the back end. So that's kind of neat. It looks good, except for it's kind of abrupt and sharp. So if we go back into our Fluting Toolpath and we choose the smooth option and we recalculate that, you'll see now we get a nice smooth kind of boat look to it, which again, might be suitable for whatever you're trying to do. If we close that down and go back into that Fluting Toolpath again, let's go with a longer ramp length. So let's go across the full ramp or the full vector to make our flute, and let's calculate that. And if we have a look at that, we'll see we get a nice sort of dish shape. Now that was what I used when I went ahead and created that seat for the top of that stool. Let's close that down and jump back into our Fluting Toolpath again. Now that's pretty much it. We've kind of looked at all of the different options. Now that might not seem like very much, but when it comes to making something that's a little bit fun, you can really experiment and have some nice options to kind of mess around with. So to move on to the next phase of this project, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up VCarve Pro because I'll be using a gadget that we can't use in VCarve Desktop, but not to worry because I'm going to make sure that this file is compatible. The finished file is compatible with VCarve Desktop, so you guys can still cut what we have in the end. You only need the gadget if you want to modify the vector that I'm going to create. So let's go ahead and have a look at VCarve Pro. So here we have VCarve Pro. Now I need to use VCarve Pro because the vector that I want to create requires a gadget, and you can't use a gadget in our desktop products. But like I said, don't worry about that because once we create the vector, we can use it in your desktop product. So that's perfect. So we're going to go up to our gadgets. Now, if you're not familiar with gadgets, we have a website called gadgets.vectric.com where you can download little programs you can add into your software. They're not official features of our software, but they do have some neat creative uses. So there's like the cog gadget, there's the spiral gadget, there's all kinds of them. Anyway, if you're interested in that, you should have a look. But what I've already done ahead of time is I've downloaded our spiral gadget, which will create a spiral for us. So here it is right here. Now I'm not going to go through all the different options here. I don't think that's necessary for what we're doing, but I will sort of just kind of gleam over it just a little bit. So you have a little pictorial at the top here of the kind of spiral it's going to create. I can give it its anchor point, and that's why I decided to put my XY datum in the center of my job. That way this spiral will be drawn right in the center of my job. We have some different kinds or types of spirals we can choose from. I'm going to use this Archimedes one. I think it works pretty good for what I want. Definitely, if you have use of this gadget, explore the other ones. They're kind of fun to use. We got my width and how many turns I want it to take. And then I don't need to worry about this last number because I'm not using the type of spiral that will take that into consideration. So we can just leave that alone. And then I can click apply. And you see I've got a nice looking spiral right in the middle of my job. Now for me, I think this is going to be perfect for the project that we're going to be working on. So before we go too far, let's go over to our 3D view for a moment and select that vector, and let's go into our Fluting Toolpath, and we can have a little bit of fun here trying to figure out how we can use this flute. So we're just going to go with the settings that are already there, which is start depth of 0, the flat depth of 0.5. I'm going to use an end mill this time. So instead of using that bull nose with the round end, this is going to have a flat bottom to it. And we are going to use a ramp at just the start only. And we're going to ramp 100%. And we are just going to go ahead and press calculate. And let's have a preview of what we're going to get there. And you see it's going to start in the middle and it's ramping down to the outside. And to me, that looks a lot like maybe something you could put a marble in and have a little bit of a marble run or a marble game. And I think that's exactly what we're going to go for. So let's just think about this a little bit more. I may not be able to fit my marble in there, so how am I going to make this a little bit wider with one tool? Well, I can't do it unless I use a bigger tool, obviously, but I want to use this same tool. So to do that, we're going to close down my 3D preview, and then we can go back over to our 2D view. And with that vector selected, I'm going to do a few offsets here. So I'm going to offset this particular vector out both sides. So it's going to go to the left and the right of this line. And we're going to go out 0.625. So that's about a quarter of the diameter of my tool. And that we'll pretend is going to be my step over, okay? So let's do that once. Let's offset that outwards. And you'll see I have those two lines. Then I'm going to grab this inside one and I'm going to offset that inwards one time. And then we'll select this, that one there, we'll do it one more time. And then we'll take this outside one and we'll offset outwards twice. So outwards once, and then we'll do it one more time. And now I think we have enough tracks to make a nice spiral that will be wide enough for maybe a marble to run down. So what we'll do is we'll select all of those. Let's close down our offset tool and go back into our Fluting Toolpath. Sorry, I should select those all now. And let's just recalculate that. Let's reset our preview and let's preview that visible toolpath and we'll see what we get. So there's the first spiral that's starting to work its way down to the outside, and that looks pretty neat. That's our second spiral, and you'll see what's happening here. We're slowly starting to make this really interesting kind of dome shape from our spirals. And I think that is going to be almost perfect for what we want, except for it's going the wrong way. Really, I'd like to have it start high on the outside of my spiral and be low in the center. So to do that, what we can do is close this down. We'll reset our preview to start with. We'll close this down, go back to our 2D view. Now the way the Fluting Toolpath works is it takes into account the start position of your vector. So we need to go ahead and reverse all of these. So with those all selected, we're going to zoom into the tails of these, go into node mode, and we'll just hover over these endpoints and we'll have P on our keyboard, and that will change the start point to be this end. Now if you forget that, you can just right click on that and go down to make start point, and you'll see that P is right there for you to remember. Helps remind you of what we're going to do. That looks great. Perfect. Let's go back to our 3D view for a second. Let's just recalculate that toolpath, and hopefully we'll get what we want, where the spiral starts at the outside at the highest point and then starts to kind of work its way down to the middle. And yeah, I think that's doing exactly what I'd like it to do. It's going to make more almost like a dish. And you know what? If you wanted to, you could make a really fun looking sort of snail shell dish out of this without even going any farther than what we already have. And that would look pretty cool. That's a bit of a big step down there, but you could work around that. Now you'll see where I'm going with this. So, and believe it or not, this project that we're going to talk about, that's it. There's a few pocket toolpaths, a few profile toolpaths, and everything is done. So what we're going to do is we're going to take what we just learned, we're going to open up the file that you're going to get, and that's going to be in VCarve Desktop, and I'll go ahead and work through all the toolpaths with you so you get a really good sense of how you can use this Fluting Toolpath to have lots of fun with this project. Let's do that right now. As you can see, there's the vector that we created using the gadget from VCarve Pro. It's just a copy of it into a VCarve Desktop. Now let's have a look at the actual file setup that I have here. If we look at our job setup, you'll see that's a single-sided job. It's 12 inches across, because that was kind of the size of the boards that I had available to me, which seemed a decent size. A height of 6 inches. Fair warning, if I had something that was more like 6 1/4, that would have been a better deal, but I didn't have that on hand, so I went with the 6 inches. The thickness is about 3/4 of an inch. It's a bit thicker here, but I've used some variables in the actual toolpath creation, so if you change that and just recalculate your toolpaths, then it should take into account at least the material thickness. You still have to check everything else, but that'll be a good little sort of tip for you, so you don't need to worry about that down the road. We're going to zero off our material surface. The datum is the bottom left corner. It doesn't matter the modeling resolution when you're using the Fluting Toolpath. It really doesn't matter at all, so you don't need to worry with that. I just have mine always set to very high because my computer can handle it, and we'll just go ahead and click OK. It's just warning me that I've got some already pre-calculated toolpaths and it's going to cut through my material, but that's not a bad thing. So you'll see that I've got 2 sheets set up here. So that kind of gives you a little bit of insight into what we're going to do. This project is actually made up of 4 different layers, and we'll take a look at the first and third layer. I know it's a little funny that I named them that way, that this first sheet has the first and third, not the first and second, but that was just the way my design had worked. It seemed to be the best process while I was trying to work through how I was going to make this. There was a bit of trial and error with this, that's for sure. When you talk about using a marble and wood, you have to be really careful that everything works out pretty much perfect. There's still some things that I'm hoping you'll be able to iron out, but pretty much it's a working thing. So, you know, with a few little quirks, which is the way it is, right? Every so often. Anyway, okay, cool. So we have our spiral. Let's go and have a look at our layers. We've got a layer called spirals. So like you saw a second ago, I went ahead and made a bunch of copies of that spiral so I could create the right width of track for my bearing to run down. And then I've got layer 1 here, which has some extra vectors for us. The profile vectors, some pocket vectors, things I needed to create some holes. So again, this is the first and the third layer. And if I slide over, you'll see that now there is a layer 2 and a layer 4. So let's just kind of think about this for a second. And I can use the one I already have cut here to help demonstrate what's going on. So if I move this a bit closer, this is the first one, the first layer where your actual marble is going to go down through the middle. So that's the track that kind of gets it some speed. Now this one here, as you can see, is on top upside down. But if I flip it over, you'll see that it has that dish shape to it. And that was important because I had to make enough room between the top of this sort of dome and the inside of this piece of wood so the marble wouldn't get stuck. Okay, now I want to just warn you ahead of time, the tricky bit is that when the marble comes down to the bottom here, it sometimes gets caught in this bottom area. I'm assuming it's because there's some fuzzies there, or it's just wood, or maybe more importantly that my material wasn't thick enough to give me enough sort of energy in my bearing to make it kind of run and bounce around like I wanted it to. But it still works about 80% of the time, which isn't too bad. We've got the holes in the bottom of that, and the bearing will fall out and fall onto one of these 4 little holes. And in a second, you'll see how I created the exit points and also a little bit of a fun scoring system here. So the kids can have a good time with it, or you and your wife, or whoever happens to be hanging around. So we'll build this back up again. So there's the base, there's the one with the hole in the bottom. I also created these little notches here so you could kind of line everything up nice and easily. Put that on top of there. This one goes on upside down. And then your top one, where the actual sort of marble run is on the top. So if we have a look at that, again, this is the first and the third we're looking at right here. We'll jump over to our 3D view and we'll have a look at our tool paths that I've created. Now I've already gone ahead and sorted these in the order that I think is probably best to cut them, but as we always say, make sure that you check these tool paths individually so they're safe and appropriate for your machine, the tools you have on hand, and the material you're cutting into. So let's just preview these one at a time. So we're going to go and preview the selected toolpath. So this will be the first one. So we're coming from the outside, the edge, and what we're doing is we're creating kind of an angled ramp that's going to be a spot so that we can put another ramp with a ball nose on it to make sure that the ball will stay in on top of that ramp. And so once this is all finished up, we'll have a look at that actual track that we're going to put on top of this. I'm going to show these out of order, but it's not the way I cut them. So that looks pretty neat. I like that a lot. If we go to our track fluting, and we'll preview that toolpath, you'll see that now I've got a little track for my bearing to run down, which, you know, looks pretty cool. Let's go now and look at the other one. So this is the reverse of this. So instead of it being a dish, this is actually going to be like a mound. So if we preview that toolpath, this looks exactly like what we saw in the first file that I created with this spiral, showing that I had to reverse my start points to get the the first version to make it more of a dish. And this was sort of the original thing where it rounds up into the middle. And this is mainly just so that when my ball falls through the hole in the top, it has a way to run down to the edges. And it looks pretty neat once it's all cut, and it's fun to watch cut actually. Little spoiler alert, I had to cut a couple of these to get everything to work out okay, but everything's happy now. So that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and cut a center hole pocket, and then the pockets for the ball to fall through. Those are good right there. And then we have our cutout, so let's preview that visible toolpath. Now you'll see how this just fit into my material. So again, if you had something a little bit wider than what I had on hand, I think you'll have better luck with it. But it did hold together okay. So nothing disastrous happened. Let's go over to our other sheet here. And this is where we have layer 2 and layer 4. And we can have a look at the vectors just quickly by displaying them in our 3D view. So we have another spiral here, and this is going to be the inside of the one that I turn upside down with a hole in the top. So when the ball comes through the middle, it'll actually fall in. And then this bottom bit has a couple sort of traditional flutes where it's a single line starting high and going low so that the ball can actually come out and roll into the little outside, I guess you could call them pockets, or yeah, whatever, so you can actually get your score. And at the end of those we've got, I decided to put like a little V bit dot at the end, so these are worth 2 points and that's worth 1 point. Now, if for some reason your ball gets stuck inside, although you had a great idea, then maybe you don't get any points. And then you have to disassemble it, get the ball out, and reset it up again, and try again. Might be a nice, fun way to sort of incorporate in maybe a slight flaw in the thing, and actually make it into a way to have a little bit more fun. So let's go ahead and preview all of these. We're just going to preview all the toolpaths that are here, and we'll hide our vectors. And see, this is what we're creating. We're creating that inside of the top of the second level so that I have room enough for my bearing to fit in there and roll around and hopefully scoot to the edge and then fall through a couple holes in the layer below that. And this all has to do with how you set up your tool paths. You have a start depth of 0. Your fluting depth could be whatever, however far you think you are safe to go into your material. And then you get those nice flutes. Cutout paths, we've got the little spots for the bearings to fall into when you're all done, and there are the points system on the end. And that's pretty much it. Like I said, this whole project is just some good planning, mind you. The fluting toolpath, pocketing toolpath, profile toolpath, and yeah, it works out pretty nice. So to prove that, we're going to jump over to our CNC machine and watch this thing actually cut. We'll do a bit of sanding, and then we'll show you how it all goes together again, and we'll follow this up with a little bit of a closing, okay? See you in a bit. I think those cut as expected. We did a little sanding in between to make sure that the ball rolled freely down the track here, so that was needed. And my fix for the inside of this third section down, I think is going to help, but we're going to see in the end once we get it all together. So now what I want to do is we are going to replace the wood with this other material that we're going to use for the other two halves, so the second and fourth sort of layer. It'd be kind of nice on the outside. I might get this neat layer effect. That'd be kind of cool. And then we're going to cut it. We'll take it out. We'll do a bit of finishing, a little bit of sanding. I might give it a clear coat, maybe not. And then we'll get back and see how it all turned out. So I have to admit, that was really fun to watch cut. I love the way the spirals cut, and you know, that was really kind of an interesting thing to be part of, I guess, in the end. So we have all the parts here all ready to go. We've got our bottom. I think that worked out perfectly fine. I don't have anything really to say about that if I was going to do this differently. Edward did come down and he mentioned that if you have a hard time getting the bearing out of the little pocket at the end, then maybe you could actually cut right through the bottom. That way when you pick it up, it would just fall out the bottom. That might be a nice little upgrade. The next bit is this part here. This is the part that if you make it, you may end up having the bearing kind of get stuck in the edge. Not just stuck, but it'll just kind of sit there and rest. If that happens, I think a little bit of sanding might fix it, but also I think it's the grain of the wood that I used is sometimes seems to just kind of catch it. But like I had said, turn that into something fun. If it doesn't fall out of a hole, then you don't get any points at all. And I like the fact that I added these little side edges here so you can actually line everything up nice and easy. There's the bit again that kind of leaves that space so the bearing can kind of move in between the two. And then we have the top. Ollie had a nice idea, if we were going to upgrade this again, was to put a little bit of a spot to hold the bearing in the top when you're not using it, because right now it just kind of rolls around or sits in one of those holes. Yeah, that worked out really well. I can't say much more than that. I hope that you take the time and maybe learn to use the Fluting Toolpath a little bit, have a lot of fun with it, see where you can use it in your projects. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, we'd really like you to. If you have any comments, please leave them below, especially if you've got any experience with the Fluting Toolpath, maybe in a project you've got. If you make this thing, please post it in the Vectric user forum so we can see that you've done it and maybe whatever changes you've made. But until then, you know, I hope you have lots of fun with your CNC and yeah, you make something really cool with flutes. One point. That's not bad.